Yes, I guess you can't come to a conference this year without having a conversation about the war. So I'm going to start with Anzac Connections, and it's the War Memorial's major web and digitisation project for the centenary. So the biggest sort of content component is we've been digitising First World War letters and diaries and progressively releasing them to the website. I'm going to be focusing mainly on sort of some of the copyright issues we've had with that and talking through some of the solutions. So this is the collection of John Simpson Kirkpatrick. I'll give you some examples of some of the issues. This collection was one of the first that we put online as part of the project, an icon of Australian military history and the First World War. The collection's been in the Memorials Archive since the 1950s. It was donated by the family. The majority of the War Memorials collections come in via donation, and that's an issue in our dealings with how we make these collections available online. This collection actually became an orphan work for about 30 years. We were able about 10 years ago to find the family. They're in the UK. A lot of people don't realise that Simpson wasn't an Australian, and actually he was working his way around Australia and was hoping to get a passage back home, enlisted with the AIF and ended up at Gallipoli, not to his great excitement. Saw a few pyramids, dust, so sick of being here. And it's interesting to read Simpson in his own words. And this collection, luckily, when we were able to find the family, were able to give us the permission to put it online. One of the dealings about 5 years ago with the family, the Simpson families, they were very elderly. We could only communicate by letter. And explaining copyright to very elderly people who don't really understand the internet is problematic. So it took us really to find another member of the family before we could put the collection online. And if you think about Australia's cultural heritage, although Simpson was not Australian, he forms a huge part of our cultural heritage. To have this collection, to have its use limited to for a period of 30 years where really it was not reproduced because at that period there wasn't any exception in the Act, is something we all need to think about with these unpublished manuscripts. So letters and diaries, unpublished works in this format are in perpetual copyright, and the copyright gets passed down to families and can end up looking like a family tree root, so it spreads as the years go on to more and more family members. Generally for the memorial, when we try and seek permission, we try and find somebody that will speak on behalf of everybody. Otherwise, it would just be a logistical nightmare trying to find every single member of the family to ask for permission. Anyway, Simpson Collections published with permission. With these collections, so there's the cultural heritage value of making them available. That's why these items are put into the collection. They're put in as a memorial to the person who was there, and as well, the intention of giving them to the memorial has always been about research and use and getting those collections out there. So the spirit of the donation is always for use. Here's an interesting collection. So this is a collection of Ian Idris, and he became a popular writer in the post-First World War period, pretty much putting out, I think, a book a year. So a very prolific writer. His diaries have crossed my path throughout my work at the memorial, and I've used them a lot in different ways. And so I've looked at their use in our reading room, and at any one time when I've gone to use this collection, it's been on hold and out to a researcher in the reading room. And if you think about that, You think about the use of this collection. As a writer, he has a beautiful turn of phrase. He can describe, and he's the collection that people go. He was in the Light Horse. So if you want to write a history about the Light Horse at Gallipoli, you would look at Ian Idris because he can describe and tell a situation. And so at any one time, it's on hold to people writing books and doing research into the Light Horse. And if you think of the pressure on that original paper object, 100 years old, it's not going to last another 100 years. So we've got two imperatives with our digitisation program. It has to be for public access to help preserve the original. Once we digitise and put these collections online, we don't make the original available in the reading room unless it's a special occasion, you know, with the cameras and, you know, or family visiting their collection in that kind of way. They're not restricted completely, but they're not just used for, daily basis. So it's the heart of our digitisation is a preservation program. There's only one way you're going to save these collections. The papers in itself is pretty stable. If you leave it alone, it will live for a long time. If you love it to death, then, it won't last. So we have an imperative as an institution to look after these collections and make them available. And really, the only way we can meet those two needs is to put them on the web and publish them, which of course gets us into issues with the Copyright Act and the fact that the copyright is perpetual, and that most of the memorials, First World War collection, are orphan works, and we've lost contact with people in the 30s. Often, they were soldiers that didn't even really have direct family. So copyright is a huge problem for an institution looking after a collection that is used extensively. The other thing is with digitisation, you have to look after your digital asset, and most copyright, the Copyright Act is, one preservation copy. Most digital asset management systems, if they're worth anything, require two copies that talk to each other and check each other against each other. So if 200AB doesn't apply to a standard digital asset management system, then there's nothing in the Act that really covers managing digital collections. Oh, that was John Raw's collection too. That's an interesting story. So he also had an amazing way of writing. He really was deeply affected by what he saw on the Western Front, and he wrote this home very truthfully to his family. You don't often see that. You do, but you don't often see it in collections. I'm covered in another man's brains and blood, and I'm wearing another man's clothes. Why shouldn't you people at home know about that? Charles Bean borrowed this collection of letters and typed them out, made a copy for the memorials collection to use to write the official history. He was actually told at the time, oh, it's too strong, don't use it, But he did, and he copied huge pieces out of it for the official history. And when the memorial went back to that family in the 1930s to ask permission, the family said the originals are gone. So the copy is sometimes the only thing that exists. So copies are very important as well over time. Otherwise, we would have lost this collection. Interestingly enough, part of this collection is published, and so some of it is available in published format, which means this is a public domain, this manuscript. So, with all our orphans that we'd like to put on the web, we have a set of established procedures in our institution, a set of search procedures that we use to comply with the flexible exception. The memorial has used 200AB quite extensively to make our digitisation program possible, and we do a bit of a search for the family. If we can't find them through our own records, we look on Ancestry and some other places, and then we post a blog on our site. The blog has provided us with families, not as many as you would think, but the odd family member. It's also been nice. It does tell people what we're doing, and it's part of what we do is say the things we tick to say, all right, look, this is 200 AB. The problem with 200 AB is it limits its use. Ultimately, we would love contact with the family to ask permission, because what we find with this project is that the more the ones that are on the web, they become the stories of the First World War in many ways, and we get contacted by people writing books, people making documentaries. We, of course, as the War Memorial as an institution, go out and tell these stories in public forums, and it's like, I want to use raws now in my book, you know, that kind of thing. So we're bringing them out. And 200 AB, collections that are orphans, that are published under 200 AB have a limited use. The exception doesn't cover commercial use. So if we had a US-style fair use system, most of the requests to the memorial to use some of these orphan works will be met by a US fair use system. With 200 AB, most of the requests we get to use these collections can't be met by 200 AB. You know, it's either for commercial purposes generally, or they're not an archive or library, they don't meet the steps. So it's good, it meets our preservation program. It gets the collection out there for research, but it really limits how Australians can use these collections. We were pretty open about, and you're welcome to have a look at this on our blog. We sort of outline the search that we do, and how some of the public reaction is, yay team, we love, you know, what you're doing. And others are like, I can't believe this is in copyright. What is this? This is ridiculous, you know. So a lot of people are unaware of just how much resources an institution used to try and meet the Copyright Act. There's some of the reactions from the public. One of the collections that we did go out pretty hard to try and find, we only have one. We got 4,500 collections of letters and diary collections related to individuals from the First World War in the Memorials Archive. Only one, and I think we got a new one coming in recently, so I guess I'll say two, are written by an Indigenous person. So it does provide a unique perspective on the Indigenous experience, these two collections. We did really try to find this family, and actually, strangely enough, they turned up in an email last week. They'd actually found his name on our list. So we're producing an Indigenous guide, like I don't know, as an institution, the War Memorial managed to acquire so many lists of Indigenous people's research into who was Indigenous that served in the First World War. Your sort of ethnic background wasn't identified as part of employment. So it's a question that even the RSL in the 1930s were looking into. So it's one of our most frequently asked questions, how many Indigenous Australians served. So we're starting to put this list together. We've got 800 names so far, but it's built by volunteers. The research that goes into it is volunteers and family identity and that kind of thing. And yeah, they found Charles' name in this list, and were very, well, we haven't heard back from them yet, but they're excited to find it there. And so now that we've found them, we're asking them, you know, permission to put it online, and told them that we'd published it originally under 200 AB, a section of the Act. So anyway, watch this space with that collection, I suppose, see where it goes. Yeah, so I guess basically in summary, and it's probably not a new story for most people here working in cultural institutions, a collection donated in the 1930s will generally become orphaned due to time, and a museum needs to manage these collections as expected by the public, that is to access them, use them, and also look after them into the future. The Copyright Act really, as it stands, doesn't help us do that. The two best opportunities for us would be to adopt a US fair use style system that can enable broader use, or put something into the Act that would make items deposited into a cultural institution expire after a certain amount of time. So a lot of public resources go into managing these collections, and they really are limited in the way they're used, and it's generally not in the spirit of how these collections are donated to us. Okay.